We'll give folks another minute to get logged in. All right, it looks like the attendee number is beginning to stabilize, so we'll go ahead and get started with the preliminaries here. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the third week of Security Break. For those who are new to this program, Security Breaks, it's a weekly series we launched to answer your most pressing workplace safety and security questions. Our format, it's a short 15-minute presentation packed with business continuity planning, strategies, security, and then we go straight to Q&A. It's called Security Break. We want to keep your business moving with short presentations with information that you can actually use all in the span of a coffee break. And thank you for tuning in today. We've got people from a range of different industries and throughout the country. So before we get started, just a couple notes on format and logistics. In your window, you'll see a poll tab. We have a current poll to get us started on if you own or rent your office space. The poll is anonymous, and we'd appreciate you responding. We'll queue up additional polls throughout the presentation to have you participate and share your situation with us. To the left of the polls, you'll see Q&A. We'll be addressing questions at the end, but please add them as you think of them. When we'll get to them. This webinar will be recorded and it'll be emailed to everyone today. And if you know people who were unable to register, it'll continue to be available on our website as a recorded presentation. And finally, bandwidth is challenging for everybody given our virtual environment. We apologize in advance if we have any audio or video issues, and I promise we'll work through them. So my name's Herb Brichta. I'm the host of Security Break, and this is who I am. I won't besiege you with bio information. I've been doing safety and security in an operational context for over 20 years, and my bio is on the webinar page if you really want to read it. I'm excited to have a guest today who is Michael Carroll. Mike is a registered professional engineer. He's got extensive federal agency and specialized mission-critical facility design and construction experience. He's worked on a range of healthcare, laboratory, and office building projects, working to create healthy and safe spaces like we're discussing today. So welcome, Mike, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Herb. Good to be here.
This is what we're going to cover today. We've got some CDC recommendations specifically dealing with building mechanical systems, and we're going to look at those, have Mike offer some practical insight into those recommendations, and then we'll begin looking forward to both the future design considerations in an office and also reoccupying your office. Before we get into that, how this all kind of relates into the safety and security realm, why should you be that interested in your building's HVAC system? Well, first of all, you have OSHA's general duty clause, which, as you know, if you're a follower of the series, it requires the employer to provide a worker with a safe environment that's free from recognized hazards. We know COVID-19 is a hazard. We're going to get into Legionella later. We know that's a hazard. That's been around since the 70s. And CDC has also identified COVID-19 as a hazard and has provided guidance for hazards associated with HVAC systems. But instead, if, OSHA, maybe they don't catch everybody, maybe you're not that worried about it, there's somebody else you have to be worried about, and that's dudes with billboards, all right? Personal injury attorneys, all right? And we'll review the elements of a negligence tort just in case, you need a refresher on that. So to have a negligence, you need a duty that's owed to somebody. Well, OSHA says you owe this duty to your employees, so that's done. The duty's been breached. Well, if you allow COVID-19 or Legionella through a known hazardous condition to exist in your office, then that duty's been breached. Causation, you did it. damages get awarded. All right, so pay attention to this both for OSHA stuff because you care about your employees, but also to avoid liability. And remember, it's not on the landlord or the building owner. The OSHA general duty clause requires the employer to provide the workers with a safe workspace. So, Mike, the first bit of CDC guidance is to increase ventilation rates. What does that mean in practical terms that we can operate with?
Short and sweet, ventilation is outside air coming into a building or facility. Typical office buildings, which you and I reside in, don't get as much ventilation as like a laboratory or healthcare facility would. Uh, Places that are known to have sicknesses. You ever hear of the term of sick building syndrome, which is kind of a popular term in the 80s? That was because buildings weren't getting enough ventilation. So probably in the late 80s, early 90s, we started actually looking at just how much ventilation needed to go into a facility, and it varied per person, per square foot, things like that. And it was originally just kind of a bulk number. And since the lead and efficient design of energy efficient buildings started coming through the late 90s, early 2000s, the amount of ventilation that was required per guidelines and codes has actually decreased. So it's kind of more energy efficient. So that's kind of contrary. What CDC and ASHRAE is recommending is kind of contrary to what we're used to. So ASHRAE is the governing body, so to speak, of standards and guidelines for HVAC, and they make recommendations all the time about what's good building practices for filtration, ventilation, etc. So the little slide on the screen there shows that virus particles, depending on the size, can either be airborne for a matter of seconds, a matter of hours, or even days. And the coronavirus, COVID-19, is in one of those small micrometer particles that will actually stay airborne for multiple days. And so thinking of how we're getting rid of what's in our building now, ventilation, diluting that dirty air in the building with fresh air from outside is something that CDC and ASHRAE really recommend. So what we want to focus on is trying to bring in clean air to return a building to a normal state, so to speak, of getting rid of those any potentially bad particles.
Okay, thanks, Mike. And then moving on through the CDC guidance, it specifically says to increase outdoor air ventilation. Again, what does that mean to a building? Right, we can't open our windows in most office buildings. So how do we do that?
No. If you have the ability to, if the weather's good, open your window. That's pretty much free ventilation. But there's a phrase for us mechanical engineers that the solution to pollution is dilution. So the more ventilation you can bring in, the better off that you're better clean air you're going to have. Like I said, normal ventilation rates might be enough to reduce sick building syndrome. But in terms of extra built pollution, if your building's been shut down for a while, you have to clean it even more. Sadly, there is no kind of one-stop shop for removing viral particulates. It's to be a combination of things. If you're bringing in more outside air than normal, that's a good thing. If you can make it 100% outside air and exhaust 100% of the building air, that's a great thing. That's how hospitals and labs are designed. Most offices are not. So retroactively, it might be difficult to do that. But ASHRAE overall has multiple things you can kind of compound to help improve the situation in the building and make sure that nobody inside is continuing to get sick.
Okay. And then filtration, Mike, what can we do here?
So yeah, in addition to bringing in fresh outside air, and hopefully you're not in a polluted area, it could be difficult to bring in fresh air in some very dense urban environments. But if you're bringing in that outside air or even recycling some air within the building, you want to make sure you're filtering it correctly. So a typical kind of building or even the filter in your home air conditioner is not as fine of a filter media that will catch the smaller particulates. And even the best filter media out there doesn't catch all of them. So if you have kind of a basic standard cheap filter, you want to, and it's called MERV ratings, probably a 7 or 9. Try to get something a little higher than a 13. It'll catch more of those particulates. However, one thing to bear in mind is that the thicker the filter to catch those particulates in the filter itself, it's going to have more energy use on your fans. The fan's going to have to take more power, more energy to get through those filters. In addition to a better filter, make sure that so if you can see the left side of the picture is a bunch of cartridges in a filter bank. Make sure that those are sealed around. A filter is not going to protect everything. But if you let leaky airflow past the filters, it's not going to catch anything. So you want to make sure that your filters are sealed around them to protect anything from bypassing.
Okay. And then, Mike, UV. We see it in
Yep.
hospitals. Is that a
So that
practical?
the
Go ahead.
prior picture too had some blue lights on it. If you noticed, those are actually ultraviolet light bulbs. A little more detailed than that, but essentially UV will kill the ability for particulate to multiply and attach itself to something. So in top of traditional filter changes, you can use UV light either in the air handler and the ductwork, or if you see this picture here, kind of a hospital setting, you can actually put UV light in a room itself. You want to put it high enough so it's not going to be exposed to somebody, but you can retrofit a space, put these in hospitals, labs have things like this. In general, they're installed in places where there's kind of a vulnerable patient, vulnerable person, but they're also where it could be installed where there's a high public area. Personally, I've seen them in like lobbies or restaurants or something just to help keep the potential for sickness or particles out of the public area. So, like I said, anything where it might be vulnerable, it's something you can easily retrofit in an existing building if you can't go in and put it in your air handler.
So, Mike, before we move on, these MERV filters, these more dense filter materials, and these UV lights, that's not typical in a normal building. Is that something that we should be looking to implement in in an office setting that's not healthcare?
Honestly, if you're going back to your building next month, it might be difficult to put some of these things in. The filters are easy, the UV is not. But I foresee, I think, after this pandemic that we're living through, that it's going to be kind of more a forethought in designing buildings and designing air conditioners to think about this in the future. So retrofitting some things might not be as easy, but future design, I think we'll start looking at these with more detail.
Okay. So moving into practical applications, right? If I'm an owner of a building or a landlord, what do I do to implement those CDC measures?
First and foremost, flush everything. So you briefly talked about Legionella earlier. If you have standing water or standing air or stagnant air in a building, you've got to flush that out and filter it. Same thing with your water system, chill water, domestic water. You got to get that stuff filtered and clean before you allow people to come back in.
Okay. And then this demand controlled ventilation, what's that?
So demand control ventilation is, like I said, about 20 years ago, we went from a standard kind of CFM per square foot of ventilation, cubic foot per minute, to a more controlled, I'm going to take the fresh air where I need it mentality, again, for energy savings. So if you have something like, I'm not going to release fresh air into a conference room until it's needed, so it's actually measuring the carbon dioxide in the room, it's called demand control ventilation. Disable that. That's not going to be flushing your system. If you have any energy savings modes in place right now that are going to be reducing the amount of ventilation you have in a normal practice, it's not going to help you. So we need to up that ventilation and flush that building.
Good to know. Thank you. Then so now put yourself in my shoes. I'm a tenant that doesn't really know anything about this kind of stuff. What can I do to protect my employees? I have an obligation as an employer to make sure that they don't have these issues.
Well, we'd like to think that we're all looking out for each other in this day and age, and ultimately, you are responsible for your employees, and the tenant's responsible for your space. So check with your landlord, make sure they're doing this flush. And I don't mean for the morning of going back. I mean it should be days, if not even a week, of flushing the water system, flushing the air system, making sure they're getting 100% outside air into that space as much as possible. Get confirmation. Don't just take their word for it. Make sure you get some reports or something to say, yeah, we've done this, because ultimately they will be held accountable if somebody gets sick.
Okay. And then I added that bullet on the bottom there for the information of the audience. There is through CDC and OSHA, NIOSH, all of that realm there, you can request indoor air quality evaluations. That being said, I imagine everybody's going to be requesting one when we get back, and what their capability is, I don't know, but it is an available resource. And then we're also going to talk briefly about Legionella, because normally this is, a very manageable thing. Despite there being 10,000 cases per year, doctors feel that this is underdiagnosed, and that's according to the CDC website. That's not me. But it's once you get it, there's a decent fatality rate associated with it. And furthermore, as the bullet says on the slide, the CDC says there's zero safe level of Legionella in your water system. And Mike, if you don't run your water and you've left your building unoccupied for a while, Legionella is really a concern, is it not? It can develop.
Absolutely. I mean, bacteria will be living in water, and Legionella bacteria is rare in a water system that's filtered. It has the right amount of additives added to it, like the water with fluoride coming into your house, and then even cold water or hot water won't have as much of a Legionella growth. But if your water system's been standing at lukewarm temperatures for days or weeks, chances are it could be in there. So you need to do a full flush. Make sure you have some additives in there to filter out and clean that water.
Okay, and then the same on your HVAC system as well.
Yep.
Cooling
Yep.
towers.
I'm talking all water, cooling towers, sinks, toilets, any fountains you have, any water that might have been standing. You need to get that clean.
Good to know. Thanks, Mike. So, folks, we're done with our 15 minutes of content here, and we'd like to go straight to your questions and answers. In addition, we had another poll question pop up. So that being said, Mike, we got one question here, and it says, how does increasing outdoor air ventilation affect the cost of maintaining inside air temperature?
So it really kind of depends on how close your outside air temperature is to the required temperature inside. Lots of times you hear things called like air side economizer or economization, which means you could bring in direct outside air and not have to spend a lot of money or effort on cooling, heating, humidifying it. So ideally, if I'm bringing in 60-degree, perfectly humid air, you don't have to do a lot of work to it. If it's 95 degrees and super humid, you've got to do a lot more work to it. Vice versa, if it's cold and dry, you've got to do work to it. So sadly, it's not a direct answer, but you need to condition whatever that outside air is into your design state in the inside.
So to put it in layman's terms, then in summer and winter, we're looking at increased utility bills in order to deal with this coronavirus.
Correct. So it's not just your fan utility and electric; it's your water and humidification going too.
Okay. To the sender of that question, thank you for it. If you need more clarification, please throw it either in the chat or in the Q&A again. And again, thank you for your question. We have another one here. What are we looking at from a high-level estimate of cost to make some of these changes in an office building? The ventilation and filtration changes.
I mean, in terms of utility coverage, as we said, it kind of run the fan more, and it's going to depend on how much air you need to bring through, how efficient your fan is. An old fan is going to be less efficient than a newer fan. So that's kind of tough to pinpoint, and that's just going to be kind of fractions of whatever wattages you're already running, kilowatts per hour. Filtration, again, if you're just changing the box filters, it's probably I don't know, $50 per filter for one of those cartridges, and you probably need 10 to 15 of them, depending how big your air handler is. That's a pretty standard thing. Hopefully your landlord already has some on the shelf. Hopefully they can easily get some higher MERV rating filters. But if you're going to go in and start retrofitting things, that's kind of a different story. So there's a contact name in the next slide if you want somebody to look at your building and help you with that.
On the ASHRAE?
No, I meant your contact.
Oh,
sorry.
Thanks for the plug, Mike. Yeah. So what you're saying then is there's a cost benefit that has to be done on replacing things like the fan to make up for the decrease the interference caused by the filters. Sorry, I'm screwing the terms up. So there's a cost benefit to do there, but generally speaking, the more the filter filters, the more expensive it is, and the more power you have to put into your system to get air through. And then when you start talking UV lights and replacing the size of your fresh air intake and stuff, then you're into major retrofit territory. That's what you're saying.
Correct.
Okay. So we don't have any more questions. We'll take a look at the polls. We've got most of the. Oh, here comes a question. So Let's do this last minute question here. Are there any supplemental equipment that could be put into an office space, more portable type smaller units if the larger equipment can't be altered? Does a Dyson air purifier at workstations help?
There's actually UV, and I call them robots. That's kind of a UV structure that looks kind of like a large trash can, and you can actually change the baffle on it to not face towards a person, so to speak. So yeah, there's UV things you can bring in. They're portable to help in that regard. The Dyson air filter, same thing. It's going to try to pull out some of the particulates, but it won't be as good as UV would be. If you have perhaps like a small window shaker, so to speak, air handler, you can, or air conditioner, you can get better filters on those. So there's definitely some small portable type things you can do as well. Kind of in the big building level, though, if that's your concern, it's better to go up to the unit itself.
Okay. And something to keep in mind with all of those office appliances is the electrical load at the individual workstations and how much stuff we have actually plugged into various office outlets. But yes, if do we answer your question? If so, please, or if not, please let us know. We'll go into the polls. It looks like an overwhelming number, 83% of the respondents rent. So you're in a situation where you do have to work with your landlord to make sure that these things are done. And it's the reason we brought this up and brought it in is not to say that landlords are intentionally negligent or even lazy. Like, if you think about it, most buildings are in, except for maybe the weekend, they're in constant operation from the time they're built till the time they're torn down. A building sitting empty for months and months is an anomaly. So, landlords this might not be in their head. This might not be part of what they're thinking about. So it doesn't hurt to remind them, and as Mike said, we're all in this together. Another one has the second poll question. Has your organization started developing an office reoccupation plan? And 93% said yes, they have. So hopefully we've provided some things for inclusion into that plan, especially protecting against Legionella. Even if all your employees come back healthy from COVID, you definitely don't want to reintroduce a very known and very manageable hazard. Mike, do you have any parting shots on along those lines?
No, like I said, if we all work together and look out for each other, turning a building on and spending a couple extra dollars to get that flushed out isn't the worst thing in the world for a landlord, and for a tenant, you're going to feel a lot safer walking in.
Well, thank you very much again, Mike. Thank you to everybody who's attended the webinar. Next week, we're looking at design considerations and office layouts, so please tune into that. Our contact information is on your screen right now. Feel free to contact me or AE Works at any time with any questions. We'd love to help. Otherwise, have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you again for tuning in.
Thank you, Herb.
Bye, everybody.